I'm your host, fucking Dave, and welcome to another very special episode of the shit show that I like to call Everybody Dies. In my previous video, I briefly compared some US VHS releases of the Faces of Death series. Since then, I've discovered a lot of new information about those tapes, as well as releases around the globe. Cuts, edits, bans, fake sequels, and spin-offs are only the beginning of the nonsense that I found. I call this waste of time and money a bunch of junk, a guide to the fact and fiction of Faces of Death.
Faces of death, faces of death, faces of death all around me. Faces of death.
Faces of Death? What was the Sound of Music already rented?
Faces of Death was released in theaters in 1978 and saw its first video release in the States in 1983. This clamshell is the most commonly accepted first release of the film. Yes, my copy is a beta, though I have seen more than one VHS copy with a case that still says beta on it for some reason. There is also this release, which according to Gorgon Video themselves on a modern re-release was the original artwork. If you look at the copyright info on the back of that release, it says Copyright Maljack Productions Incorporated, which is the original name for MPI Home Video. Whereas the clamshell and other releases read Copyright FOD Productions. Many still argue over which in fact came first, but no one knows for sure besides MPI, and as you'll soon realize, they don't take questions about their releases. And then there's this blue bastard. I've been able to find even less information on this version. It doesn't help that all the copyrights have the year of the theatrical release, not the actual home video release. As for content, most if not all of these home video releases contain a gas chamber scene filmed specifically for the home market that was not part of the original film. Spoilers, it's fake and it sucks. Faces of Death 2 was released to theaters in 1981 and saw a VHS release in 1985 in a clamshell and slipcover edition. This clamshell is also the more commonly found release, making this slipcover even more rare to collectors. Faces of Death 3 saw a theatrical release in 1985 and was rushed to VHS a year later in 1986. Faces of Death 4 was in development around 1985 but was later scrapped when MPI discontinued the whole franchise in 1987 due to ongoing controversy about the franchise. By 1990, shockumentaries began taking off and all sense of good taste was lost, hence Faces of Death was resurrected, beginning with a compilation of the first 3 films titled Worst of Faces of Death. New scenes were filmed with a different narrator, Dr. Flawless, claiming that the previous host, Dr. Gross, died under his knife. Having a host amongst all of the pre-existing footage is more effort than most of the Faces of Death clones would put into their projects. Also in 1990, parts 1 through 3 saw re-releases with new artwork. In late 1991, early 1992, Faces of Death 4 finally saw a release direct-to-video. Dr. Flawless, the host from Worst Of, returned, stating that Dr. Gross committed suicide, contradicting what he said previously. 1995 and 1996 gave birth to the infamous Faces of Death 5 and 6 respectively. 1996 also saw a VHS box set that claimed that only parts 1 through 4 and Worst Of were official, thus the speculating began. Before we get into that, however, I'll mention Faces of Death Fact or Fiction that came out in 1999. This faux documentary about a documentary reveals the truth about what scenes are real and which are fake in a really corny way, featuring newly filmed scenes of the host from part 4 and Worst Of. It's worth watching once if you enjoy the cheesier side of the series, but the info isn't entirely true or remotely interesting. Before the deep dive into the content and controversies of each individual release, I'd just like to quickly talk about these modern re-releases. This re-release of Part 1 was released with 2 different covers, this one which has sold out twice now. They came out around 2014, and I'm not sure when the reprints were. Please do not confuse these with the original versions. I've already seen people buying and selling these believing them to be the rare, expensive original releases. They are not. Do not be fooled. The identification numbers on the spines do not match. This is my biggest gripe with modern day VHS. If you just want to watch the films in order without any fuckery, buy any of these DVDs or the box set from Gorgon Video themselves. That way you know what you're getting. I especially recommend the 30th anniversary Blu-ray or DVD, that comes with director commentary going scene by scene talking about what's real and fake and where the footage came from, hence making fact or fiction completely obsolete. It is unknown for sure, but highly speculated that new ownership of Gorgon Video and pressure to release shocking content caused rushed releases and countless mistakes, which would help explain the following. If you'll notice, these copies of 1 through 5 have these cheap bootleg-looking labels. If you look online and see any of these versions, it is most likely going to look similar to these. The labels themselves vary greatly as for what they actually look like, but they all look like shit. Then if you watch the tapes, it's even clearer that they are bootlegs. The thing is, there are so few legit releases available that it is believed that Gorgon, knowingly or not, distributed these fucked up versions themselves. The way you can tell the difference between these fucky versions and the box set versions are the fucky ones have no barcodes and the good ones do. They also say the original on the top of every box. Here's a breakdown of each fucky version and what's wrong with them, besides having bad quality. Faces of Death 1 ends abruptly after the bear attack scene, losing about 30 minutes of the movie. A title screen says "The End, copyright 1997, though this release supposedly came out in 1990. Faces of Death 4 ends after the leech scene, losing only about 10 minutes of the movie. The same copyright title card appears. Worst of, there are so few copies of this pre-box set version of the worst of that I believe this one to be legitimate. My copy is sealed, but I've seen others online with proper looking labels on the cassette tapes. Part 2 and 3 are so fucked up that they're the reason I started this project to begin with. Now, it took a long time, but I found at least one copy of each that are in fact legit releases with proper labels, as you can see by the item ID numbers, which match these releases and not any others. But these are so rare that I still believe Gorgon is responsible for the versions I'm about to cover. Now, I can't vouch for every copy, but I've seen at least 5 different copies of each that resemble these that do not have the same content that they are supposed to have. Instead, this version of Part 2 has clips from Part 1 through 4, bookending other footage not from Faces of Death at all. I originally believed this footage to be thrown together by someone, as it's mostly scenes found in a million other shockumentary releases, but then I got a copy of this that has no relation to the series, just a similar name to act as a cash grab. Well, this copy of Faces of Death 2 consists of Faces of Death 1 through 4 footage and 27 minutes of this movie, while Part 3 has scenes from Faces of Death 1 through 4 thrown randomly around the other 31 minutes of this release. Now, there is some footage in this that wasn't used for these releases, but like I said, it's just the same recycled bullshit seen elsewhere. You can tell your copies are fucked up right away if there are no opening credits and instead the tape opens with these title screens. Then there are parts 5 and 6. These are nothing more than random scenes from Faces of Death 1 through 4 shittily thrown together. No new footage was used whatsoever. Even the artwork for both are recycled from parts 1 and 4. And yet there are just as many copies of these floating around as 1 through 4 that I still believe Gorgon was responsible, just trying to make more money during the hectic 90s where supply couldn't meet demand and shortcuts were taken. This is all alleged information and in no way fact, but like I said, MPI and Gorgon, they'll never tell. That's about it for US releases, other than a lot of different DVDs that seem to all be about the same. I'm sure there are bootlegs that exist of these as well, and who knows what fuckery might be lurking there, but that's another rabbit hole I'm not falling in. For now, let's begin our trip around the globe and look at how much worse Faces of Death releases can really get. The UK VHS release of Faces of Death from Atlantis Video actually predates the US release by a year, coming out in 1982, though it was heavily censored and later banned as a video nasty. This ban lasted until 2003, but to this day UK releases still have the following edits. The dogfighting scene is omitted entirely, even though it's fake, and the infamous monkey brain scene, which also is fake, but is only missing the beginning part where the real monkey seems in distress. I couldn't find out much more information about the sequels in the UK besides a couple DVDs released in 1999 by Screen Entertainment. So for now, let's travel to Germany where perhaps the most fuckery takes place. Faces of Death was released in Germany as the German translation, obviously, Gesichter des Todes on VHS by All Video in 1982, also predating the US release. Madison Video also released a copy later on. Both were heavily cut and eventually banned. This ban lasted off and on until 2022, as other releases were released uncut during this time but were eventually confiscated. VHS copies of the German releases seem to be the hardest to find, so all of my info about the actual content comes from reviews online. I do, however, have these DVD and Blu-ray releases and can tell you what's on them. But first, this interesting bit of trivia translated from this booklet included in this Blu-ray from MPM Astro. With Madison Video, this guy not only brought the follow-up films Faces of Death 2 to 4 to German video stores, but also acquired the German naming rights to the series from this guy, who brought the original to theaters together with the distributor Avis Film. In 1991, he produced two of his own sequels, Faces of Death 5 and Faces of Death 6. For this guy traveled to the USA and acquired archive material from news channels as well as recordings of accidents and autopsies from questionable sources. He supplemented these cuts with scenes from the MondoGore series he had licensed and added a narrator. However, he dispensed with the framework story typical of the first four films, which had given them a pseudo-scientific feel. A seventh installment in the series was also planned and, according to this guy, was nearing completion. However, the confiscation of Faces of Death 4, the first installment in the series to receive this dubious honor, thwarted his plans, thus proving that Gesichter des Todes Part 5 and 6 are not the same recycled garbage that these US releases are. Now, copies of these German releases can be found online, only in German, but according to these DVDs from Retro Film, there are also English tracks available, but more on those later. The footage for parts 1 and 4 seems mostly unaltered, besides reported World War II footage being omitted, blurred nudity, and German dubbing on the VHSs. All footage from these DVDs and Blu-rays have optional English or German audio as well, by the way, and are supposedly uncut, so I didn't attempt to get copies. Yet. The US version of Part 2 is a slim 78 minutes, and as boring as this entry is, it's a mercy. The European version is 20 plus minutes longer. Some of the footage is good, don't get me wrong, but making Part 2 longer is in no way doing the film or the viewer any favors. Here are some stills from the extended footage. The only real loss we suffer from the cuts is a scene of Dr. Gross holding a bunny while looking for Easter eggs. Strangely, Part 3 was released as Fear in some countries. Instead of death, the new narration and marketing focuses on fear. Some footage is added and some is removed. Footage of the original narrator, Dr. Gross, is removed and inserted are various actors. Some claim Fear began as a separate entity altogether, and the US purchased the rights, cut out all of the narrators, and replaced them with our beloved Dr. Gross. This seems more likely, as all the dialogue seems to reference fear in every single scene rather than death. Footage-wise, Fear has several narrators on camera with unique dialogue, and they all do the voiceovers with dialogue almost identical to the US version spoken by Dr. Gross. Scenes removed are any animal violence in the Autobahn scene from the beginning. Scenes added are some quick footage of serial killers, an exorcism, a highway arrest, interviews with survivors of a helicopter crash, and a strange scene of a group who gets naked and eat placenta. The best thing about this DVD release from Retro Film, it has both versions, and I'm not just talking English and German language tracks. The Faces of Death 3 version is a hidden Easter egg, but the second disc with the extended version is something I didn't even know existed. The title card actually says Gesichter des Todes 3 and has the Dr. Gross scenes and narration with all of the extra scenes and special guest experts included in a god almighty 2-hour cut I will never sit through. Still, it's cool that it's an option. Gesichter des Todes 5 was released in 1991 by Madison Video on VHS only in Germany, 4 years before the US version of Part 5. This IMDb reviewer claims that the footage was taken from death faces, death scenes, Inhumanities 2, and a lot more unsourced footage. Though as previously mentioned, this seems not to be entirely correct. This Blu-ray of Part 5 from Astro that I mentioned earlier made things even more confusing, as it says on the cover, the worst of Gesichter des Todes 5. In typical Faces fashion, much speculation and false information spread about this release. Well, now I know the truth. The title is stupid but doesn't lie. This is in fact the original worst of Faces of Death. And the German Part 5 is included as well under special features, albeit only in German. The trailer even mashes both together, but the best part is the poster gallery. We get artwork for Part 5, The Worst of Faces of Death, and hilariously Worst of Faces of Dying, a completely unrelated movie. Someone obviously just took whatever they found off Google Images and called it a day. Speaking of The Worst of Faces of Death, you can buy these DVDs called The Best of Volume 1 and 2, also from Retro Film. These were created around 1992. Part 1 is supposedly just scenes from 1 through 3 sloppily thrown together with only 2 brief scenes stolen from elsewhere. For this reason I skipped it, but did buy Volume 2 as the DVDs for 5 and 6 from Retro Film are out of print. So this was a good way to see some of that footage and confirm that English tracks did exist. As expected, Volume 2 consists of footage from 4 through 6 with no new footage. On this release, however, the original Worst of is included as an extra. This release was supposedly the very first time it was made available in Germany. To add to confusion, IMDb says that the actual Worst of was released as the Best of 1 to 3. But I haven't found anything proving that. What I did find is another document about the seizure of Volume 1 confirming that it is also known as Best of 1 to 3. So it's just a simple mix-up. Gesichter des Todes 6 was also released on VHS only in Germany in 1992 by Madison Video and later on DVD by Retro Film. Some footage was taken from There Are Still Slaves in the World 1964, Days of Fury 1980, and who the hell knows what else. Gesichter des Todes 7 was supposedly created in 1992 but was released only online in the late 90s. There was a lot of mystery around this release for years, but the truth is as big of a letdown as you'd expect. People claim that its footage is lifted primarily from Death Scenes 1. Whether that version was different, I don't know, but this DVD is literally just Death Scenes 2, with a title card replaced. The end credits and everything are exactly the same. At least they were nice enough to include a German dubbed version and the original English track. Now, I won't go into it, but the Death Scenes releases are equally fucked up, so this mistake is understandable, but that's for another video. Gesichter des Todes 8 appeared in 1993 from equally mysterious origins. People online claim that it consisted of footage from Phases of Death, Death Scenes 3, and Inhumanities 2. Once again, I don't know if the original version was exactly that or not, but this DVD from Retro Film is literally just Death Scenes 3 with a new title card, but this time the end credits were removed and replaced with just End. Mystery solved. Optional English or German language tracks on this release as well. Let's head to Japan and hope things are a little clearer over there, but I doubt it. The Faces of Death series was released as Junku or Junk in Japan by 2 companies. Orange Video House, owned by Psy Enterprise, who also produced and released the Guinea Pig films, in 1985, and Mad Video of VNR Planning in 1988. VNR stands for Visual and Retail. As one poster says, junk means a lifeless human body. Other than production credits and added title cards at the beginning, both companies' versions appear to be the same, unless otherwise noted. It is commonly accepted that VNR Planning were the first to bring Faces of Death to Japan, but I have checked and the Orange Video House releases actually came first a couple years before. Faces of Death 1 was released as Junk 1 Death and Tragedy. The changes are a new title card at the beginning, the film is dubbed, not subbed, and nudity is blurred. Faces of Death 2 was released as Junk 2 Death Ritual. There's a new title card at the beginning, it is also dubbed, not subbed, the nudity is blurred, and it is the longer European cut. Part 3 was released as Junk 3 Moment of Death. There's a new title card at the beginning, this is the Fear version without Dr. Gross, and has Japanese dubbing. There are some scenes that are still in English with Japanese subs at the bottom. Now this Part 4 was released before the actual Part 4 was even made, so Junk 4 Death and Destruction is actually the 1980 film Days of Fury that we had mentioned before. There's a new title card at the beginning, but the full credits play and still say Days of Fury. This film is subbed, not dubbed. New Junk, Resurrection of Death, is the actual Faces of Death 4, which was released by VNR on Mad Video in 1991. I'm unsure if it is dubbed or subbed, though. Junk 5, Image of Death, consists entirely of original Japanese footage, captured specifically for this film by director This Guy, aka This Guy, founder of V&R Planning, who was also co-director on the actual Faces of Death 4. And he went on to make the Death Files series, Death Body, Death Women 1 and 2, and more. Junk 5 was later repackaged as an entry of sorts in the Death Files series, but that too is for another video. Junk Omnibus, Tragedy Special, is Japan's very own compilation video. Every country gets their own. Nothing extra was filmed for this. There is one short scene of the attempted assassination of George Wallace added at the very beginning, but otherwise it's all recycled footage from parts 1 through 3, lazily slopped together, like most compilations. Unrelated to this series is True Gore and Empire of Madness, True Gore 2, which were released as Super Junk End of the World and Super Junk 2 Empire of Madness by Nostradamus. Some other unrelated films have also been released as Super Junk. This Japanese DVD set includes 1 through 5, 4 being the Days of Fury version, and 5 being Junk 5 Image of Death, just in case anyone was wondering. Faces of Death has countless more releases all over the world, but not much information exists about them, so I assume they are pretty straightforward releases, either with various cuts and or dubbing. Here are some dishonorable mentions though. France released Inhumanities 2 as Faces of Death 3. Brazil released Paramedics as a Faces-related film on VHS. Brazil also released Death Scenes as Faces of Death Deadly Portraits. And this piece of shit, and its sequel I already mentioned, are completely unrelated knockoffs made by other companies. Some online even believed Shocking Faces of Death to be a mysterious alternate version of Faces 5 or 6. And then there's the Faces of Death 2000 series that also had foreign releases. Unfortunately for those other countries, there is no other language equivalent of using a fucking Z for an S to look badass. Banned from Faces is yet another series that's not even connected to the Faces of Death series. They were made by a different company. A ripoff of a ripoff. And don't forget about this fucking series. Here is some more information about those 46 countries that Faces of Death was supposedly banned in. Wikipedia can only confirm that the original film was banned in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and Germany. The other 42 countries are still unknown. Australia had all entries banned for many years. To this day, only the first is legally available. Until Gorgon or MPI answer for their crimes, JK, don't sue, we will never know the truth for sure. All I can do is present what other websites and people have said, weed out the obvious falsehoods, and average out the responses. A lot of info I have collected myself from spending a fortune accumulating this collection. IMDb, Wikipedia, etc. are not 100% positive sources of information, as anyone can make amendments on those sites. So choose to believe anything in this video or not. Let's say the video is at least 60% true info, and 40% may just be rancid cauliflower covered in fake blood. My name is fucking Dave, and this has been A Bunch of Junk, a guide to the fact and fiction of Faces of Death. A very special episode of the shit show that I like to call Everybody Dies. Poop!